UDL in Action podcast wishes to acknowledge First Nations peoples in Australia and across the world whose songlines traverse the globe. We pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging whose cultural traditions inspire and continue to educate.
As an early career teacher, I've noticed that many students struggle not only with subject-specific vocabulary, but also with understanding how text, symbols, and instructions are structured. In relation to UDL Guideline 2, when is the optimum time in the planning process to support students in accessing and interpreting this language? Do you have a particular approach to planning that helps with this, and are there any practical strategies or examples that have worked for you across different subject areas?
As outlined in Zach's question this week, in this episode of UDL in Action podcast, we explore Representation Guideline 2, focusing on language and symbols. This guideline is all about ensuring that the language, vocabulary, and symbols we use in teaching are accessible and meaningful for every learner. Today, we'll unpack practical ways to support learners through clear language, multiple representations, and inclusive communication practices. I'm your host, Rebecca Rosenberg. I am joined by our knowledgeable and generous co-host, Rhonda Laswell from Indiana. Rhonda is a retired educator and Universal Design for Learning coordinator. She's spent nearly 2 decades immersed in UDL as both a teacher and a professional development coach for educators. We are always so thrilled to have Rhonda share her decades of experience with us in each episode. Rhonda, thank you for being here.
As always, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
In this series, we are joined by Zach, an early career teacher who is currently working in a regional high school in Queensland. Zach is keen to learn more about UDL, and we're committed to helping all educators understand UDL and apply it effectively in their practice. Let's just go over again Zach's question for this episode, which we just heard. As an early career teacher, I've noticed that many students struggle not only with subject-specific vocabulary, but also with understanding how texts, symbols, and instructions are structured. In relation to UDL Guideline 2, when is the optimum time in the planning process to support students in accessing and interpreting this language? Do you have a particular approach to planning that helps with this? And are there any practical strategies or examples that have worked for you across different subject areas? That's such a thoughtful question, Rhonda, and one that I know that many teachers are grappling with. We've often talked, you and I, about how language can either open doors or create barriers for learners. I'd love to hear your practical strategies and how teachers can intentionally plan for this, and how we often assume students already have the tools to navigate it. Rhonda, what are your thoughts in regards to Zach's question and even my follow-on thoughts in regards to this?
Well, it's a hugely large, stacked question, because really, when you think about education, it's all about vocabulary and it's all about math symbols and all the pieces that go into decoding language, even from the earliest years of learning to read, right? Because we start by learning to read, and then we finish by doing quite the opposite, right? Learning by reading. And so there's the vernacular that goes with just education in general, right? We have what we call our teacherese or teacher speak, and that can creep into the classroom as well. And then we have students for whom whatever language the school is teaching in, that is not their first language. And as a teacher, you're trained to just attack your content specific vocabulary. And that's important. And that's definitely at the beginning of the planning phase when you're planning, right? Because vocabulary is a section of the whatever lessons you're doing or activities you're doing. But it's making me think of a time when I was teaching seventh grade science, that I just during planning period one day I went down to the language arts teacher and I said, "Hey, what is like the basic vocabulary that you come back to constantly when you're decoding text and you're looking at understanding, themes and stories and all this information?" Because sometimes what they're looking at is fiction, sometimes it's nonfiction. And in the very back of their vocabulary book, there were like 4 pages of vocabulary words that they use all the time in their language arts. And I said, "I'm going to go make a copy of these and I'm going to see how I can embed this into what I'm doing in science, number one, because why should I be looking at text differently in science than I am in any other subject if we're talking about, right, the language of learning?" So that was one practical thing that I did that I felt like would really help a lot of students. But when you're really starting out as a pre-service teacher, the first thing you really obviously want to do is sit down, look at your lesson, and highlight any words that you know are the vocabulary words, right? Or the things they tell you they show in bold. But then from there, as you go through the content, what you really need to be looking for is what other words are there that I know there's going to be a percentage of my students that are just not going to have access to these words. Like these are important for them. And so, or important for them to know, and they may not know. So that's the second layer I would do. So obviously, I'm going to have my lesson that's probably going to come from my curriculum that's going to surround my content specific vocabulary. But then there's going to be those other words that I know students are going to need to have help with. And I think the other important thing before I go any further too is to remind people that, we only have so much working memory available to us in a given day. And we only have so much working memory depending on how old we are. And if we are tying up a lot of working memory with doing studentness, where are the supplies? Oh, I don't remember where the cafeteria is. What do I do with my backpack? Those little things that we think we teach and everybody's got them after the first week of school. Everybody has them, or we have a new student who comes in, right? Or just navigating that world. We got kids that come to us and school is very foreign. What we do at school, the way we behave and teach and treat each other is very foreign. And so making the environment itself from a social and emotional perspective very safe and open and easy entry is the first place I would start. Second, label, right? So regardless of age, especially when you're getting into much more sophisticated vocabulary, there's still nothing wrong with labeling things and using personal dictionaries. Those are always a great strategy for students. And at the end of the day, modeling and teaching them how to do that. So you're modeling the critical thinking by saying, okay, today we're going to be studying osmosis. How many of you know or have heard the word osmosis, right? And you're going to have a few kids, but you're going to have a lot who don't, and some who may in a different context. And say, you know what, if that's not a word that you could turn and tell a partner right now the definition of or explain it to them, you need to write that down in your personal dictionary. And as we're going, you need to make sure that you're recording a couple of words that describe it or a picture that'll help you remember it. So starting there and modeling that, and the teacher actually having that resource that she uses or he uses and showing students how to use that is really important, because we can give them all the tools and all the technology in the world. We think because we have learning management systems that language is so much more easily accessed. But if we're not teaching them how to use those tools, and really how to feel comfortable with those tools, we got kids who'll just play the game, right? They'll fake it till they make it, or they'll fake it till they don't. And so, making those thresholds for being able to say, I need help with that word, or I don't know what that word is, I think is really, really important. I also think it's important to remember that it's okay to talk about the vernacular of school and some of the words we use at school, and to do some mini lessons on some of those things so that our students aren't just like sitting there pretending like they know it all, even when they don't know it all, right? Because who wants to be embarrassed? And it doesn't matter whether you're a fourth grader or you're an eighth grader or you're an 11th grader, they don't want to be embarrassed. So I think those are some practical ways on the entry point. However, there are some really good things you can do on the flip side that are super easy that can lean into technology. And I say this, I don't know how many times I would say this, turn on closed captioning. Guideline 2 speaks specifically to, right? That that is so important. Some other practical things that you can do that are so valuable that you might think they're silly, but they're not. Bold, color coding words, underlining certain words. Now, you don't need to make it look like it's been had someone taking paint and splattering it. But again, if you have a system that you can teach your students around certain color coding where they know what to look for or what to think about in relation to that, that is helpful to them because they're going to make that association. And remember, the brain, the brain's going to attach to that color coding, right? And anytime you can add pictures as a layer, anytime you can add a definition and an example, those are all really, really, really important. And then as you do those things, display that somewhere in the room so that if they need to use it as a resource later, it's there. I like to do very interactive assessments where students would get up and go to different stations and just take their exam with them to do different things. And having that up in the room is just another layer of resource for them when they're trying to think through how to solve a mathematical equation, right? Just like for a moment, that word on that test or that assessment just seems foreign to them. But if they can just kind of be jolted back again and look at that and go, oh yeah, that means this, then that will relax their brains and really, really help them not tie up their working memory with stress, because stress is the enemy of learning. And I would also say anything you can do in the environment to lower that and bring that down is also extremely, extremely helpful.
It's also, stress can also be the enemy of teaching too, can't it?
Oh,
So
yeah.
there's so much. So it was quite a layered question, and you have given us an incredibly layered response with so much for us to practically take away, which is great. So to begin with, you suggested, I loved your practical example of when you were doing a vocabulary, well, you were doing your year seven science lesson. You went to the English teacher and asked her the vocabulary words that they were focusing on. I think that's wonderful because the kids are then able to, it's like the words that they're learning in one subject is they're seeing the relevance of having that knowledge across the board as opposed to just being in specific
Yes.
subject areas, which is what we can call
Silos.
silos.
We teach in silos so often, now take out your science book, now take out your language book, and you think about the word inference. There are inferences that I make when I'm reading a novel, but there are also inferences I make when I'm doing a science experiment. And so being able to interchange those words gives them a richer understanding of the language. It's also, hello, going to make them much more successful on any state standardized assessments. But, and that's not why we do it. But when we do it appropriately and inclusively in the classroom, how can they not be more successful regardless of what kind of assessment you put them in front of? Absolutely.
And I also loved the practical example of the personal dictionary
Mm.
because again, the personal dictionary can be used in science, but it can also be used in English. And by having this tool that might be for some students, it might be a practical notebook. For other students, it might be recording onto their tech device, so whether that's their laptop or their iPad, words that they can readily refer to. It might be just simply using the app notes to have a list of words that they can quickly refer back to. That's either been recorded verbally or they've used voice to text, all those different platforms. I love that idea as well. Again, we're building not only knowledge but skills in our students and therefore confidence to be independent learners, because this is again a practical strategy. And the
Yeah.
fact that, yeah,
And I was going to say also, too, we have a lot at our fingertips these days as it relates to technology, but there are just so many simple things that we can also do. And technology helps us do it. And one that has always come to mind for me is this particular, for some kids, something as simple as greater than and less than, that symbol is challenging, right? Is it this way? Is it that way? They do the alligator mouth and all that. But something as simple as font size, right? So if I make the little number little, the big number big, and I show them an exaggerated example, you know, that really then seats into the brain a little bit more. And that's something as simple as a font size. Now, can I write that on a card? Yes. Can I put it on a whiteboard? Yes. Can I put it on a learning management system and put it up like that? Absolutely. Can I type it bigger and smaller? Yes. I mean, you can use technology, put it up on the LCD, you can write it, but if they can practice it from that perspective and then write it themselves, again, a very simple way to help with those we call them mathematical and language symbols and vocabulary. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's really just making it easy for me to understand what that means, not to memorize what it means for that symbol to be facing that direction. No, for me to understand what that symbol means. And when we are universally designing our classrooms, what we're doing is we're teaching our students how to understand versus memorize.
and everything you're talking about is about that uh, cognitive accessibility.
Yes.
By just putting in place those simple strategies, it's making learning so much, and not only learning, but understanding
Yeah.
so much more accessible. I loved that example on the card. You just quickly did that then, and it just makes sense. I also very much appreciated you talking about, again, those cognitive accessibility tools like bolding certain text, highlighting certain text, not having too much on the screen, simple strategies like that can then be transferred to perhaps a poster or a chart that students can readily refer to during assessment or during a station activity. And then I also very much appreciated you reinforcing once again the importance of leaving as much space as is possible for executive functioning. So
Yes.
making sure students have their stationery. And if they don't, they just go to the cupboard or they go to the station where those things are readily available, because
Yes.
it's one less thing they need to navigate or to think about. Because we don't. Some students have come into the classroom and they've had a good night's sleep, they've had breakfast, they've had a lovely chat with their parent on the way to school in the morning, and they're ready and raring for the school day. Fantastic. But there's other students that they haven't slept. They've had an argument with their whoever, may have even been quite traumatic. They may not have even had anything to eat. So, the more we're able to set up those safe spaces that you have described so that all of our students are ready for learning, the better it's going to be. I love the way you reinforce that time and time again, and how such a simple strategy simple strategy that we can plan for as
Yes.
early career teachers, the more we're able to make that learning environment as safe and as effective as possible. That's great. That's great. Is there anything further you wanted to add in regards to that?
I don't think so. I just keep going back to the idea that, the more we can do to help lower the barrier to navigating the learning environment, the more that's going to be left over, right, for a student to be able to utilize in working memory and in executive functioning, and in impulse control, which is something kind of important that we want, right?
It sure is. Absolutely. UDL isn't about doing more at all, is it, Rhonda? It's about
No.
designing smarter
Yeah.
with intention and empathy. And that is what you have so clearly spoken to us today by responding to Zach's brilliant question. When we think carefully about the language and symbols we use, we remove unnecessary barriers and open up learning for all students. Rhonda, thank you once again for your wisdom and for sharing such practical ways to put UDL into practice. Before we wrap up, what's one takeaway you'd like our listeners to walk away with?
I think it's just to stop. And when you're looking back over a lesson or when you're planning, are you teaching students how to understand, or are you asking or expecting them just to rotely memorize?
Excellent. Thank you for tuning in today. If today's episode sparked ideas or reflections, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at udl.in.action.podcast@gmail.com. And if you'd like the show notes or resources mentioned, just click on the link at the end of each episode description to our G Drive folder for listeners. And please share our podcast with your colleagues through YouTube or Spotify. Until next time, keep designing for possibility, not predictability. Bye for now.
Toodaloo.